Okay, I got to tell you, this is going to be one of the jaw droppers. So you go ahead and start there. I'm telling you, everyone, when we're done, we're going to be sucking air. How many of you believe the Lord's coming soon? All right. Well, then this shouldn't be a shock. We're looking at decoding the prophet Zechariah. He had 8 visions in one night. If you sleep 8 hours, that's one vision every hour for all night long. And it happened on the 24th day of the month of Shevat. On our calendar, it's this coming January 26th is the night he had all these dreams. It was in the second year of Darius, and the 8 visions take place from Zechariah chapter 1, verse 7 through chapter 6, verse 15. We're on chapter 5 today. We'll be looking at chapter 6 next weekend. Just to rehearse, the first vision was the red horse among the myrtle trees. Now, as a reminder, the myrtle trees are submerged in the ocean in this vision. They're not on land. And the ocean speaks of the nations who basically have just swallowed up Israel. And the horse, it's not all the horses, it was just the red horse. And he wasn't sent to do anything but go on a reconnaissance mission. He just kind of checked things out, and he came back, and he tells the Lord basically what's up. Everything seems to be at rest, the nations with swallowing up Israel. And so the next vision he has is the vision of the 4 horns, which are represent the 4 main nations who are trying to divide the land of Israel, destroy the land of Israel. So God brings out these 4 carpenters who are to cut the horns off or to stop the nations who are dividing Jerusalem. And then the third vision is now that Jerusalem's been delivered, here's a man who is measuring the perimeter of Jerusalem, just like in the book of Revelation. And then in the fourth vision is the vision that we've talked about of how Joshua, who is the high priest, is standing before the angel of the Lord during the service. The temple is being built at this very time that Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed. They're in the process of building it. And here Joshua standing before the angel of the Lord, and the Lord says, take off his filthy garments, and let's put on new garments, and let's put a mitre on his head, which refers to the high priest mitre, and it's got a gold plate that says, Holy to the Lord on it. Okay? And then after that, then we saw in the fifth vision the menorah, or the candlestick, with the 2 olive trees on either side of it. Now we know the menorah represents the Messiah, but as in Revelation, the menorah also represents the 7 assemblies. And we know, just like Yeshua is the light of the world, we're to be the light of the world as well. And the 2 candlesticks, or the 2 olive trees on either side, were Joshua and Zerubbabel. Joshua represents, he's the high priest. It represents, I hate using the word religion. God hates religion. He wants a relationship. But he represents the religious side of things. And Zerubbabel, the other olive tree, is the king. So he represents the civil side of things. So we have government and religion coming together. And as we know, we looked at last week, Israel was responsible to keep the oil supplied to the menorah. Of course, the oil represents the Holy Spirit. Okay, that brought us to the 6th vision that we talked about last week, which was the flying scroll. And if you remember, that flying scroll was bringing a curse over the earth. There were 2 curses. There was a curse on either side of the flying scroll. On one side of the scroll, the curse was to all those who steal, thieves, robbers. But in particular, it's to the powerful who rob from the poor. It's not like it's the poor robbing to get food or stealing to get food. No, that's not the concept. The concept is the powerful people who rob from the poor. On the other side is the curse for all those who lie under oath. It's all those who swear falsely. Well, that brings us to today. The seventh vision is the vision of the Ephah, and I'm going to be explaining that as we go. And then next week, the eighth and last vision is that of the four chariots, the four horsemen, like in the book of Revelation. Okay, so I have here that in summary, the last time we had the flying scroll with the curses on both sides flying over the earth, and we found out that this curse enters the homes of those thieves and those who are lying. There, guess what? The curse doesn't come and go, it sets up residence. How would you like to have the curse come, hoping it would go a day later or a week later? But no, it abides and stays in the house. Well, God deals with sin in two different ways. He either cleanses it if there is repentance, or he uproots it and casts it out and destroys it. Okay, so after the flying curse, now comes the uprooting, where he's going to take the curse out of the land of Israel. Okay, you've got evil people, bad people in the land. Some of them get cleansed because they repent. The other ones get removed. Okay, following me. Okay, so here we go with Zechariah chapter 5. Let's look at verse 5 and 6. It says, "Then the angel that talked with me went forth, and he said to me, okay, lift up your eyes and see what it is that's going forth or on the move. And I said, what is it? And he said, this is an ephah that goes forth. And he said, moreover, this is their resemblance through all the earth." Okay, some people may wonder, okay, what is an ephah? What is he talking about? An ephah, think of a bushel basket, okay? It is a measurement of volume. Now, an ephah was the largest measure for dry goods, much like a bushel basket. And when, you know how people, when they have they're trying to find a logo for their sports team or for their high school or a logo for whatever, the bushel basket is, and the ephah would be the logo for commerce. When you think of merchants, trade, commerce, that's what the ephah symbolizes commerce. Now, if you look at Exodus chapter 16, verse 36, it says an omer is the 10th part of an ephah. So how many omers make up an ephah? 10. Okay, so how many omers make up 5 ephahs? Which is why you have the 50 days of the counting of the omer. So for Shavuot, you count 50 days, 50 omers, you're going to end up with 5 ephahs. Does everyone follow me? The basic math. Okay. Well, omers represent grain, and they would often trade in grain. And so one of the things that I find very interesting is listen to Leviticus 19:36. God is looking for just balances, just weights, and a just ephah. Okay, what does that mean? How can an ephah not be just? What he's talking about, how many of you know when people would trade, they tried to cheat when they're selling and have a little less than a bushel basket? That way they skim a little bit off the top. Of course, when they're buying, they want the person selling to give them a little extra in their basket. You following? So people, can you believe it? Humans would be dishonest when they trade? What a shock. And it says, and have a just hand shall you have. I'm the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. Okay, well, here's what is happening. Israel was agricultural, that was their industry, agriculture. Okay, well, now, due to what's happening among the nations that are what they're doing to them and their culture, they are being transformed from solely an agricultural people into a nation of merchantmen. Okay? And with that new occupation, new temptations were developing among them: theft and perjury. They would lie about what they in their trade, and they would be stealing. Okay, well, that's what the flying scroll was cursing: theft and perjury. And that's what's going on in their commerce. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 13 and 16. It says, "Do not have in your bag different weights, a great and a small, or in your house different measures, a great and a small. Have a true weight, a true measure, so your life will be long in the land your Lord your God is giving you. For everyone who do such things, and all those whose ways are not upright, are disgusting to the Lord your God." Well, what I think is interesting, this is talking about stealing. You're stealing if you're not being fair in your commercial transactions. And if they ask if is this a true weight? Oh yeah, I swear that's a true weight. You're lying about it as well. Well, one thing that I found to be utterly amazing is it just so happens. How many of you believe in coincidences with God in the Bible? This year they found some Dead Sea Scroll fragments and the world's oldest basket found in a desert cave. Here we're finding an ephah. And what else do we find? Here we find an unjust weight. Archaeologically, look at the date of this, September 2nd of this year. A weight used just to cheat in trade during the first temple times was found in Jerusalem. The two hash marks refer to a weight meaning 2 gera. That's what it's supposed to weigh. Well, it's made of hard limestone. It contained engravings indicating it is a weight of 2 gera, which happens to be 0.944 grams. Well, guess what? They weighed it, and it weighed 3.61 grams, about 3 times as much as it's supposed to. So this is proof they were having unjust weights. They would carry a great and a small weight in their bag, depending if they were buying or selling, which way they wanted to go. Can you imagine humanity has not changed? Now, commerce isn't sinful, but godless commercialism was taking over along with its temptations. Listen to Amos chapter 8, verse 4 through 6. It says, "Hear this, you that do what? Swallow up the needy." This is referring to the wealthy, the powerful. They are the thieves. How many of you feel like the wealthy, powerful, great people of the earth today are really a bunch of thieves and robbers? Look at this. "You even make the poor of the land to fail, and you say, oh, when will the new moon be gone, that we can now sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we can set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit." This was the attitude. It says that we may buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes. Yes, and then sell the refuse of the wheat. They can have the garbage. We want the best of everything. Well, I believe today, this was the religious people speaking. This wasn't the unbeliever. This wasn't the heathen. These were God's people. A prosperity gospel at any cost became the norm, which is why they didn't keep the Shemitah year. Think about it. God said, I'm going to triple your crop in the 6th year, give you a 300% increase in advance so that you could spend the 7th year with me. What happened? They got so much 300% increase, they said, forget you, God, we're going to keep planting. They were in it for the money. That's all they thought about was commercial trade. That's why for 500 years, they never kept the Shemitah year and let the land rest. They were always working it. Look at Nehemiah 13. This is after the Babylonian captivity. This is 100 years later, 70 years in captivity, 30 years they're trying to rebuild the temple with Ezra and Nehemiah, and look what happens. That same temptation's coming back. Nehemiah 13:15 and 18. In those days, I saw in Judah some who were crushing grapes on the Sabbath, getting in the grain, putting it on asses, as well as wine and grapes and figs and all sorts of goods, which they took in Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. I gave witness against them on the day when they were marketing food. And there were men of Tyre who came with fish and all sorts of goods, trading with the children of Judah, Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Then I made protest to the chiefs of Judah and said to them, what is the evil which you're doing, not keeping the Sabbath day holy? Didn't your fathers do the same thing? And did not our God send all this evil on us and on this town? But you're causing more wrath to come on us, so why not keeping the Sabbath holy? It goes to the Sabbath year. It goes to the Sabbath day. It's all about the money. It's all about trade. It's all about commercialism. That's what was going on. Now look at this. Here's where it's going to get interesting. Now, the ephah, as I said, represents commerce. When you think ephah, think a measure, a bushel basket of omers, wheat, whatever, barley, whatever grain you want to think of. Okay, but it represents commercialism at the expense of the poor. Okay, lying, perjury. And it says in Zechariah 5:7 and 8, behold, there was lifted up a talent of lead. That's a heavy weight of lead. I have the heavy weight of lead on this basket. And when you think of a talent, what do you think of? Money. That's what it was also. It was a measure of money. I give one 5 talents, 2 talents, 8 talents. Okay, so again, it reflects on the whole concept of commercialism. And then it says, and look, there's a woman that's sitting in the midst of the ephah. So here she is. Ta-da! There she is. In the middle of the ephah. Okay, this lid gets brought up. And God says, this is wickedness. And it says he cast it back into the midst of the ephah, and he cast the weight of lead upon the mouth. Get back in there. Boom. She can't escape. In other words, she gets taken up within her own wickedness. She ends up measure for measure, as she was doing unto others. She is not going to be able to escape. It's going to happen to her. Now, what does she represent? It says wickedness. Well, that's lawlessness. That's what we're seeing going on today. A talent was used in all commercial transactions because it was the heaviest weight. Now, what this is referring to is the worship of mammon, the worship of money, which is where people are at. It also will define now this is interesting. This comment I have here was in that book that I have in my little briefcase on the prophet Zechariah. But understand, this book I'm reading is 120 years old. This book was written by someone who lived in the 1800s, and the book was written before the airplane. Okay, this book is in the this is a long time ago. And it's by a Jewish, a Messianic Jew. This book is written by a Jewish believer living in the 1800s. And listen to what he said concerning godless commercialism. He said this will define the final generation of the apostate church as well as the world. Evil will also be suddenly exposed for what it is. Here, all of a sudden, she pops out of the basket like a Jane in the box instead of a Jack in the box. This is a Jane in the box. She pops out, but the world is going to see wickedness. They're going to know this is wickedness. He won't be able to be too deceptive. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to share, I was sharing this information a little bit with Rabbi Shapiro when he was here a week or so ago. And at first he was thinking, I think you're stretching it a little bit, Bill, Well, then anyway, he went and started looking at the information that I was sharing with him. And he called me the last couple of days. This is mind-blowing. This is incredible. And he was sharing with me some things, and I'm going to share with you what he shared because I thought what he added was incredible. But he said that this woman labeled wickedness isn't just any woman, but a seductive woman. This is a woman who has like a real seducing spirit. Now, I'm going to add a verse that's not on your notes. You can write this down. How many of you know there's the harlot in Revelation, right? I don't know how many of you ever consider the book of Proverbs to be a prophetic book, but it is. I'm going to read to you Proverbs 7, which is a prophecy concerning that harlot in Revelation. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. We know that's speaking of the Feast of Trumpets, okay, the tribulation. And it says, behold, there met him a woman with the attire of a harlot and subtle of heart, but she's loud and stubborn. Her feet doesn't abide in her own house. And now, here she is without. She's now in the streets, now lying wait at every corner. And so she caught him and kissed him, and with an impudent face said unto him, oh, I have peace offerings with me. This day I paid my vows. This is a religious harlot. You would think of a religious harlot, but this is a seduction of transactions, trading to be done. But I think it's interesting, she's religious. Now, one of the things that Rabbi Shapiro shared with me, I don't know all the famous rabbis from days gone by. But when I told him to research this, he went looking up all the commentaries in Hebrew, and he shot me some different screenshots of the Hebrew commentaries. And then we went over some of them. And he recommends this one rabbi who lived in the 1500s, whose name was Rabbi Moshe Alshek. Now, imagine this. This guy lives in the 1500s, and he was writing concerning this wickedness within the Ephah. He said he could not believe the word that was used, and that was basically the concept that we need to resist with everything we have this commercialism and all about the money. And he said in this book from the 1500s, if not resisted, you will be infected by her wickedness. And he was amazed it was the word infected. Now, what I think is interesting is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8 through 12, it says, and then shall that wicked one be revealed. This is referring specifically to the woman in the ephah that's all of a sudden revealed. And we know that wicked one, it says, another translation is lawless, which is what that is, whom the Lord will consume with the spirit of his mouth. He'll destroy with the brightness of his coming, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness. We know God's sending a strong delusion on the world. And here, with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth. Here we are singing the song of Moses at this time, which is all about truth and justice and judgment. But those who love fake news, those who don't love the truth, are the ones who will be deceived. And it says, for this cause God shall send them a strong delusion that they would believe a lie, that they all might be damned who don't believe the truth, but have pleasure in unrighteousness. So here we see there will be lovers of truth versus promoters of fake news, and it's always about the money. Now, look at Revelation 17, verse 4 through 6. This woman is arrayed in purple and scarlet. She's decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of all kinds of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Now, look what's on her forehead. Was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. I saw a woman drunk with the blood of the saints, with the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua, and when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. I think it's fascinating. She has on her forehead a title, Mother of Harlots. And Joshua has on his forehead the mitre that says, Holy to the Lord. They both have on a headdress. So this is the woman in the basket. I think it's interesting in Zechariah 8:16 and 17. Well, before I share that, let me show you this next PowerPoint. In addition to finding the Ephah this year, and in addition to finding unjust weights, it just so happens this year, new Dead Sea Scroll fragments were also found in Israel. Whoa, imagine that. And it says these Dead Sea Scrolls discoveries are the first ancient biblical texts to be found in nearly 60 years. The Israeli Antiquities Authority said the scrolls that happened to be found were Greek translations of the books of Zechariah and Nahum from the book of the 12 minor prophets. Guess what? It just so happens the very verse they found in Zechariah 8:16 and 17 has to do with the curse of the flying scroll and the unjust ephah. Here it is. These are the things you're to do. Speak what? The truth to one another. Render in your gates judgments that are true. Make for peace. Do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. And love no false oath. For all these things I hate, declares the Lord. That's what it was. Lying, perjury, and not speaking the truth, and unjust weights. And it just so happens that is the scroll that was found. Guess what else? It was Nahum. And guess what verse was discovered from the book of Nahum? It was chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. The mountains are going to quake before him. The hills will melt. The earth heaves before him. The world and all who dwell in it. Who can stand before the Lord Almighty and his indignation? Who can endure the heat of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire and the rocks are broken into pieces by him. You know what? I think of earthquakes and volcanoes when I read this. How about you? Do you think it's interesting? I really believe this year we're going to see more earthquake and volcanic activity than we've ever seen. Not just because this is a particular verse that was found, but wait, there's more. Remember our Rosh Hashanah service? That was at 7 o'clock. Right before it started, Bill Voice comes running up to me. You gotta hear this. And I go, what? He said, is it significant? Yeah, it's significant. And then later he comes up and says, well, Jason's the one who told me. He wanted to be honest who told him. But get a load of this. Rosh Hashanah, right at 7 o'clock before we started our service, there was a 7.0 earthquake in Mexico. And it so happens, this was on September 7th, which is the first day of the 7th month, the first day of the 7th year, a 7.0 earthquake at 7 o'clock our time. I don't believe in coincidences. I think God was punching the point that this next year, I think we're going to see earthquakes like we've never seen before. And considering volcanoes. I went to another website. Do you know there are 50 volcanoes in continuous eruption status as of this past August? And then it goes on and it says, generally there are around 20 volcanoes that are actively erupting on any particular day. Here's one up in Alaska, the Great Sitka volcano. May 25th of this last year. But can you imagine? I think we're going to see this year, I think that what does the 5782 this year bring? I think it's going to be bringing major earthquakes and volcanoes like we've never seen before. Okay, now let's go to the next verse. Zechariah chapter 5, verse 9. It says, "Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there came out 2 women. And the wind was in their wings, for they had wings like the wings of a stork. And they lifted up the ephah between the earth and the heaven." Okay, so here we go. We got our ephah, and along comes these 2 women with stork's wings. Aren't they cute? I built those. And they lift the ephah up between heaven and earth, it says. They're carrying it away. Now, a stork is an unclean bird to begin with. Now, just as Joshua's garments were removed and his sins carried away, so God is also going to remove the moral wickedness, and it will be carried away. Now, these 2 women, I believe, represent the exact opposite of Joshua and Zerubbabel, who were both a priest and a king. I believe these are the 2 unclean representations of religious powers and civil powers who are going to work together, all right? So these are evil. So here we have civil government that's broken loose from any morality. Can you imagine a civil government not following morals? But they're doing anything they can to stay in power. And they've teamed up with a corrupt religious system, also willing to do anything to stay in power, worrying they might lose their place. Remember during Yeshua's time, they were afraid they might lose their place, the religious powers, teaming up with the civil powers. History repeats itself. That's where we're at right now. Now, the woman's trying to escape. She's bound back into the vessel of her own making, being punished measure for measure. What do we find in Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 19? God says your own wickedness is what's going to correct you, and your backslidings will reprove you. Know therefore and see that it is an evil thing and bitter that you have forsaken the Lord your God, and that my fear isn't in you, says the Lord God of hosts. This is speaking to his own people. God doesn't nearly have the problem with the wicked he does with his own people. Look at Proverbs 5, 21 through 23. "For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his goings. His own iniquities will take the wicked himself, and he'll be held with the cords of his own sins. He'll die without instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he'll go astray." So these are the verses that show you we end up reaping what we sow. The snares that we set for others, we get caught up in. Now, here's where it also gets interesting. In Zechariah 5, 10, and 11, then he says to the angel that talked with him, "So where are they carrying this ephah to?" And he said to me, "To build it a house in the land of Shinar, and it will be established and set there upon her own base." In other words, Israel is where God is going to place his throne. God is removing the wickedness from the place where his throne will be, and he's putting it back to its origin where it will be destroyed there. So when it says go back to the land of Shinar, where's that? That's the Tower of Babel in the book of Genesis. This is in Babylon, which is why Revelation talks all about Babylon. Now, in other words, commerce. Wow, I've got so much stuff I want to say it right. One thing, to build it a house. I was talking to Rabbi Shapira again, and one of the ancient commentaries from hundreds of years ago said the house also could be considered a migdal or a tower. In other words, another Tower of Babel being built. Not literally, but in the concept of what they were trying to accomplish. But what do we see? Commerce and trade today sets up governments and dictates the policies of nations. Matter of fact, through it, all the mighty armaments are being built and through which wars are fought. It's the military-industrial complex. I mean, it's all about the money. Now, in Genesis 10, 8 through 10, we see the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, okay, in the land of Shinar. That's on your notes, Genesis 10, 8 through 10. So here, everything goes back to its beginning. It's circular. So what do we see at the end? Things go back to the beginning, back to Shinar. Look at Genesis 11, 1 through 3. The whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar. Okay? Now something else just hit me here that I thought was interesting. But I wanted you to see one language, one speech. Again, this is speaking of like a world government. Okay? But if you look where, here we are. And I put down in the yellow circle, the plain of Shinar. As a matter of fact, the plain of Shinar is where all the corpses settled after Noah's flood. This is where that was. This is where the Tower of Babel is built. Now, it's right there in Iraq. Now, I have up at the, if you see in the middle in red, is the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Do you see that? But the source is up in Turkey, where the big red circle is. That's where the Tigris and the Euphrates flow from. If Syria ever stops or dams up the water, if Turkey ever stops the flow, then Syria is in trouble because the Euphrates won't go through Syria, and Iraq is in trouble because the Tigris goes down to Iraq. All right? But anyway, if you go to the plain of Shinar, this is what I just caught. It says they journeyed from the east. Well, east is toward China, is the far east. It's almost like they were more that direction coming to the west and then settled in the plain of Shinar. You following me? Okay. Now, listen to Daniel chapter 1, verse 2. Here the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Okay, the first God was in Babel, with the Tower of Babel in Babylon, and God's temple vessels was put in that very first temple to another god. And so when it got taken back, it was taken back from there back to Jerusalem. But I think it's interesting that that's where they put the vessels of the house of God, in that land of Shinar. When you listen to Genesis 11, verse 4, they said, hey, let's go and let us build us a city and what? A tower, whose top can reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Well, this sure sounds very humanitarian. Prophetically, though, again, this is not necessarily speaking of a specific geographical location, but of a one world system, a one world kingdom where money and personal prosperity becomes the focus. Now, here's the other thing that Rabbi Shapiro and I were talking about that I thought was interesting, especially in light of where we're at right now. How many have heard of the Battle of Gog and Magog? Well, in Hebrew, Gog means a roof, like the roof of a house. Man builds homes with the roof to block out God. They don't want to see the heavens. The sukkah, the roof of the sukkah, is branches you can supposed to be able to see through the stars. And so the whole concept of the Ephah going between heaven and earth, it was also trying to create where you can't see the heavens, you can't see God. That you were to focus on them, which I thought was very interesting. Now, what do we see in Revelation 18, verse 1 and 2? After these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power. The earth was lightened with his glory. He cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen. It's fallen. It's become a habitation of devils. Every foul spirit, in the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. It's like Babylon is fallen. The Ephah is building its house in one sense right there with all of its wickedness. That's where it's settled. Okay. Here's the deal. Again, the Ephah is all about commerce, and I'm going to prove that to you here in Revelation 18, verse 10 through 17. We see in the last days the problem is the commercialism with an unjust weight. Standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, Babylon, the mighty city, in 1 hour is your judgment come. And the merchants of the earth are going to weep and mourn because no one buys their merchandise anymore. It's all about the money. And then look, the merchandise consisting of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and wood and ivory, wood, brass, iron, marble, cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, wine, oil, flour, wheat, bees, sheep, horses, chariots, slaves, and the souls of men. Speaking of human trafficking, that is going on right now. But the merchants are made rich by these things. And it says they're going to stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and stones and pearls. And 1 hour so great riches has come to what? Nothing. And it goes back again to the creators, the great men of the earth. They reap what they sow, and all the riches will come to nothing in 1 hour. Now, I could pull the book and read this. Again, this was written in the 1800s. I paraphrased it a little bit, and I'm going to read to you what this man wrote in the 1800s. He said, if commerce comes into such a supremacy as to make her merchants the great men of the earth, as it says, then the governmental order of the nations will fall into her hands. The governments are going to bow to the money. The world, he said, politically, educationally, socially, and religiously would be virtually under her control. The ones who by means of their commercial greatness who control or sustain these governmental arrangements will be the very pillars of the last great system of evil. Who are the ones trying to exert controls over most of the nations right now but the social media and the internet merchant giants? In the final apostasy, we will have a one-world system where a globally wicked financial system will team up with the religious system made up of both apostate Christians and unbelieving Jews and the governments of this world. These are the two wicked women picking up the ephah, carrying it back. Now listen to Acts chapter 8, verse 9 through 11. But there was a certain man called Simon, which before time in the same city used what? Sorcery, and bewitched the people of Samaria. Okay, deceived them, bewitched them, giving out that himself was some great one, to whom they all gave heed, from the least to the greatest, saying, oh, this man is the great power of God. He was deceived. They thought he was from God. And to him they had regard, because that of a long time he had bewitched them with sorceries. You know what the Greek word for sorceries is here? It's the word, we get the word magic from. Okay, here the Greek word is, I don't know how, I'm not Greek or no Greek, but mugeo or something. And it means to practice magic. That's where we get the word magic from. It also has to do with like drugs, not just magic, but drugs. As a matter of fact, this is what is amazing to me. Look what the nations are doing. Look what our states are doing right now. Here, possessing and cultivating psychedelics would be legalized in Michigan under a new Senate bill. Magic mushrooms, let's make them legal. Okay. As a matter of fact, here's what it goes on to say. Michigan senators on Thursday introduced a bill to legalize the possession, the cultivation, and the delivery of all kinds of plant and fungus-derived psychedelics like psilocybin and mescaline. But look at this. This is important. The legislation sponsored by these two Democratic senators would amend the state statutes to exempt people from criminal penalties for such activities so long as they're not receiving money. So if you give the drugs away, it's okay, but it does clarify that they can charge the people a reasonable fee for counseling and spiritual guidance. So I'm not going to sell you the drugs. I'm going to sell you my counseling and give you the drugs. And then they say there is medicinal value. These plants and fungi have a religious significance. Here you see the coming together. Okay, well, get a load of this. Cairo 7. Anyone heard of Cairo 7? That's right up here in the Northwest. Seattle is now working on the next steps toward decriminalizing possession of substances like magic mushrooms and LSD, something that's already happened in these other cities. Denver, Colorado, Oakland, California, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Oregon has legalized psychedelics for therapeutic use. But guess what? There's more. The feds are considering legalizing heroin. Okay. There you go. Well, you know what's interesting to me? We've been in Afghanistan for 20 years. Why haven't we destroyed the poppy fields? It's about the money. It is always about the money. Now, I believe in one sense, if anyone is to be considered the Babylon of the day, I believe it's China. They're the number one economically, militarily, and I'm going to show you some things. And how many of you know commercialism bows down to China, ignoring all morals when it comes to business? Right here, 83 major brands are implicated in a report on forced labor of ethnic minorities from Xinjiang assigned to factories across provinces. Look at some of these: Apple, Nike, Amazon, Microsoft, Mercedes-Benz. They don't care about child labor. They don't care about the ethnic minorities, but they want to come across like they woke up. Okay. China's tech crackdown, it's about control. It's not about consumers or competition. For the last 20 years, China's been the dominant story for both the global economy and capital markets. And I have down here, they've altered the balance of world economic power. I mean, that's what's going on. And then look at this. The Chinese authorities see technology as the next frontier of totalitarianism. That's why they're investing billions to develop and deploy new machinery such as facial recognition, data collection, tracking software to establish full-blown surveillance state. In fact, just before renegotiations with the Vatican this year, hackers working for the Chinese government infiltrated the Vatican's computer networks and what the New York Times called an apparent espionage effort. Well, guess what? The Catholic Church has bowed to the Chinese government. I don't know how many, anybody former Catholics around here? The Vatican has now said the Chinese Communist government can pick their bishops over who's over. They get to pick them. Total marriage. But get a load of this. Here's a brief history of corporate apologies to China. Everyone's apologizing to China. How many know the NBA is committed to China? Woke corporations are all hit for bowing to China while they snub America as they ignore the Chinese Uyghur genocide. They all bow to China. Silicon Valley is bowing down to Chinese totalitarianism. Everyone's bowing down. From fake news to fan culture, China is laying out what is allowed on the Marxist civilized internet. How do you know it's always about the children? They have here in the second paragraph, the upcoming regulations, many based on previous draft guidelines, span greater protection for minors against online bullying to combating fake news. That's what they want to do. The country plans to better regulate the production, the publication, and the distribution of online content. Look at the next red line. They want to fight online crimes. Efforts will be made to protect personal information and data security. Other points in the summary include a call to foster a common ideology online between the party and the people. They want to have a broad effort to raise the ethical standards of internet users and better protection for personal information and data security. Well, we'll see how that works. Economically, they're the powerhouse. How about militarily? This is from the U.S. Naval Institute, a Pentagon report. China now has the world's largest navy as Beijing expands its military influence. What about our Navy? Our Navy aims to reduce and cut higher education funding in the new budget request. My goodness. Guess what else? Israel opens a China-operated port in Haifa to boost regional trade links. It's all about the commerce. And of course, Israel rejects the U.S. plan to inspect the Chinese harbor at Haifa. Oh my goodness. This is why I wrote this book several years ago, talking about what we are looking at here. Now, Revelation chapter 16, verse 12. It says, and the sixth angel which had the trumpet loosed the four angels which are bound to the great river, what? Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed which were prepared for an hour, day, month, year to slay a third of men. So right there, a third part of men will be slain. The number of the army that was coming across the Euphrates was 200,000. And I heard the number. Okay. What country has an army that can fit that many people? China. Okay. Well, guess what? How many of you know we left Afghanistan? Well, guess what? China gets to take over our former U.S. air base in Bagram. They're looking at taking it over. Well, guess what else? The desert, the drying Euphrates threatens disaster in Syria. And the timing is quite interesting. As a matter of fact, right here, China's now in Kabul. How long would it take with the dried up Euphrates anyway to drive from Kabul over to Tel Aviv? It's 48 hours is all it takes. It's less than 3,000 miles. It's like the distance from Seattle to New York is the distance from the Chinese base in Kabul, Afghanistan to Israel. And the Euphrates dried up so much. From this article, reputed to have once flown through the biblical Garden of Eden, the Euphrates runs for almost 1,700 miles across Turkey, Syria, into Iraq. 90% of the Euphrates flow comes from Turkey, the United Nations says. And since January of this last year, the water level has plummeted 16 feet. Women have to walk 4 miles just to get a bucket of water for their children to drink. Interesting, at this time, China is taking over our air base, the Euphrates is drying up, and it's only a 2-day drive to get to Israel. Interesting. Okay, now we go to Revelation 18. I'm almost done, if you got just a few more minutes. Now, get a load of this. Revelation chapter 18, verse 23 and 24. And the light of a candle will shine no more at all in you. And the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride will no more be heard at all in you. Your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorceries were all the nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of the prophets, saints, and all that were slain on the earth. Okay, here we see the great men of the earth were made rich through her sorceries. And guess what the Greek word for sorceries is now? Pharmaceuticals. It is pharmakia, where we get the word pharmaceuticals. Now that is translated as sorceries. In other words, the great and wealthy men of the earth, through the use of their pharmaceuticals, will be the leaders in deceiving all the nations, so they buy into their Ephah basket of lies. Revelation 7:1. Before I go there, I got a few more things to show you. Talking about how the great men of the earth, through their commercialism, taking control of nations, held to ransom. Pfizer plays hardball with the COVID-19 vaccine negotiations with Latin American countries. It says here, Pfizer has been accused of bullying Latin American governments during negotiations to acquire the COVID-19 that their countries need for their people to live. And the company has asked some countries to put up sovereign assets as collateral, such as embassy buildings and their military bases, to cover against any possible litigation. Officials from Argentina and another Latin American country, which can't be named because they had to sign confidentiality agreements with Pfizer, said that Pfizer's negotiators demanded more than the usual indemnity against civil claims filed by citizens who might suffer serious adverse events after being inoculated. They said Pfizer also insisted the governments cover the potential costs of any civil cases brought as a result of their own acts of negligence, fraud, or malice. In Argentina and Brazil, Pfizer asked the sovereign assets to be put up as collateral for any future legal costs. Now, of course, the World Bank, how many of you know the World Bank really cares for the poor? Why, they're helping, look at this, $157 billion to help developing countries fight this pandemic health. Wow, look at the next red line. They're helping more than 100 countries, home to 70% of the world population. The World Bank is now helping. Of course, they will give them policy-based financing to help them pay everything back. You know, the governments will never get the billions owed to keep their citizens alive, and so these great men of the earth will control all these governments without firing a shot. As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization is even bowing to China. They're all bowing to China. Okay, now here comes, boy, you want to fasten your seatbelts. I haven't even got to that part yet. Hopefully that'll allow this to keep playing. Concerning the World Health Organization and bowing to China, they decided that we need to have a universal health passport that every country will recognize. So they've come up with digital documentation of COVID-19 certificates, which has the vaccination status, all the technical specifications and implementation guidelines, so everybody can follow it. And everyone will get a QR code on their phone that can be downloaded. And if they don't have a smartphone, they'll be given a PDF printout with a QR code or a handwritten printout with a QR code. That DDCCVS is digital documentation of COVID certificates for your vaccination status. Again, from the World Health Organization's website. The purpose of this is the continuity of care scenario and a proof of vaccination scenario. And so if you'll notice on the little, in the blue, on the second arrow down, it's going to provide a schedule information for an individual to know whether another dose and of which vaccine is needed. This isn't just for COVID. This is to carry all your health vaccinations. They know what you've been vaccinated and will be vaccinated. But look at this on the green side. It's going to help them understand who can go to work, who can go to university education, who can go to school, or for travel, international travel. They are coming out with these proof of COVID certificates based from the World Health Organization. Well, who in the world would want to do that? Digital health online COVID-19 passports are ready to go live in Wales. Oh my goodness. Israel, European Union agreed to recognize the coronavirus coronavirus vaccine certificates. Of course, everyone wants tourism, and if you're going to eat in the French restaurant, then the French people get to eat in the Israeli restaurant, and we've got to make sure everybody's vaccinated, so it's going to be required. Now, you might say, who's going to go with that? Well, vaccine passport enforcement in New York City began this week. Violators face up to $5,000 fines. Now, that's not you, that's the business. If you go to your favorite restaurant and if they allow you in and you're not vaccinated, the business is going to be fined $5,000 for every person they allowed in that's not vaccinated. You can forget in the near future about visiting places if you're not vaccinated. As a matter of fact, Los Angeles County to mandate COVID-19 vaccine passports, not only in New York, but also in California. Well, let's run to Hawaii. Hawaii. Hotels require Hawaii vaccination passports. That's all the new rules. Oh my goodness, how many are glad you live in Washington? King County customers of restaurants, theaters, gyms must now show proof of COVID-19 vaccination or a negative test. Forget about going to restaurants in the near future if you're not vaccinated. Now, well, thank goodness it's just international travel and there's always Amtrak. Well, guess what? U.S. Representative Don Byron introduces a bill to require vaccine or negative coronavirus tests for even domestic travel, and you'll notice it's even for Amtrak trips. They want to have you be vaccinated before you can do any transportation anywhere, even in the United States. Now, I don't know how many of you saw this Tucker Carlson show. It was like 39 minutes, but I grabbed 1 minute. Then I'm going to have Jill play now, and you kind of see what's going on.
Mandating vaccines for air travel, train travel, or interstate bus travel would also be important.
There are privileges associated with being an American, that if you wish to have these privileges, you need to get vaccinated. Travel and having the right to travel interstate, it's not a constitutional right as far as I know, to board a plane.
So, and we're quoting, if you wish to have these privileges, you need to get vaccinated. The person who said that, the last person in the montage we just played, is the former head of Planned Parenthood. Her name is Leana Wen. And that's quite a statement to make. So here you have a woman who moved to this country from China, sitting authoritatively in a box on CNN, lecturing Americans that their most basic birthright, the right to travel within their own country, the country they were born in, is now in fact a privilege that the Democratic Party may decide to grant if you follow its demands. Dr. Wen, may I have permission to drive my kids to school?
Now, but we do know that we can vote them out. Okay, let's take a look. Public interest from the Legal Foundation. Nearly 15 million mail ballots were unaccounted for in the 2020 election. More specifically, 440,000 mail ballots went missing or undeliverable amid only an 81,000 vote margin of victory in Pennsylvania. 444,000 ballots went missing, and it was only an 81,000 difference in Pennsylvania. 83,000 mail ballots went missing or undeliverable amid just a 20,000 vote margin of victory in Wisconsin. Biden won Georgia by 11,000 votes. 27,000 mail ballots bounced off of a bad address, and at the bottom, another 217,000 mail ballots are unaccounted for. Okay, now, here we go. There's a lot of ways there can be voting fraud. You can have voter registration fraud, ballot stuffing, felon vote fraud, absentee mail-in ballot vote fraud, voter suppression, voter caging and purging, votes cast in the name of deceased people, voter impersonation, fraudulent signatures. Here's what woke me up at 3 a.m. that just hit me like a ton of bricks. This next election, next November, a year from now, for the midterms, they don't ever want another president like we had. They want to make sure. And so guess what? I believe by next November, vaccination will be required to go to a voting booth. And all the unvaccinated people get a vote by mail. If the way the vaccination status is going in the program, and I can tell you, you don't want to be infected by someone standing next to you in the polling line. And what I see is coming is will never be the same again. As a matter of fact, I saw this morning. This morning, North Carolina judges strike down voter ID law claiming it's racist. This next election, there will be no voter IDs. Only the vaccinated can vote at a polling booth. All the unvaccinated people vote by mail. That shows you where we're at. Now, Revelation 7:1. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the earth or sea or against any tree. Can you imagine? What happens if you decide you want just wind power? All those big windmills. What happens to your energy and the lights when the wind stops blowing? Well, guess what? Energy prices in Europe hit records after wind stops blowing. This has been several months. The wind has stopped blowing in Northern Europe, and their prices of electricity is going through the roof. Okay, so we're going to close with this thought. I believe, as you know, it's the time of year of the closing of the gates, closing of the doors. And I really think that 5782, which is this next year, 2021, 2022, is the closing of a lot of our freedoms, a lot of our gates. And I believe next Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of a new 7-year cycle, it really will be a whole new world. And so the Lord is speaking to everybody. We've got another year, okay, but we got to repent. We got to get right. Because the doors are closing, just like with the ark. You got to get in a boat while the door is open. With that, let's stand. And let's pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we just thank you so much that we can have ears to hear. What a day to speak this message on Ha'azinu, the Song of Moses, when you tell us, he who has ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches and to the assemblies. Father, may we not engage in dishonest commercialism or trade or lying under false oath. But God, let us expand your ministry. Expand your kingdom. Invest in being a light to the nations. We just thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And I just pray, Lord, we don't want to be building a Tower of Babel. We want to be building your kingdom. And we thank you that even though on her name is abominations, as you put on Joshua, you put your name, holy to the Lord. And you've asked us to bless your people so you can put your name on them as individuals. So as I say this prayer, may you just receive the Lord's name. Ivarekavaka Adonai Beish Maraka, Yair Adonai Panavileka Vichuneka, Yisa Adonai Panavilecha Viasem Laka Shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In that wonderful name, Eyeh Asher Eyeh. Amen. Go get him.